Welcome back to Floss Law. We're trying out YouTube Live for the first time here. Hoping to be a little more effective rather than recording the videos and then posting them back on later. I just had, unfortunately, an afternoon closing get canceled, so I had a little free time, and I'm like, I haven't made a video in a while, and I really appreciate all the likes and comments I've been getting. Really shows a lot of you are getting value out of it and getting a lot of phone calls from people having a lot of questions, especially about that auction video. I had no idea how many people were interested in auctions. But one thing that's been coming up a lot that I want to make this video for you today is to cover evaluating your deals. There's a deal evaluation video. So if you don't need this, you don't need to watch it. But um, a lot of people I've found um, don't know this or need help with this or need me to kind of explain this a little bit more in depth for you. So we're going to go over both for just a regular deal, your auctions, your judicial auctions, auction.com properties, properties on the MLS, properties get sent to you by a wholesaler, whatever. How to evaluate those deals and how to evaluate what your purchase price should be and if you should buy the property or whatever the case may be. Um, so the first thing we need to do, and this is the first thing I see a lot of people mess up. Step one, right at the beginning, step one we're going to have is figuring out your end price for the property. Now, it seems kind of backwards, but this process can simply be explained by backing out to get to your price. So what that means is you're going to start at the end of the process and you're going to back out to get to where you should be at the beginning of the process because it's so crucial when you're trying to do a project and you're trying to buy a property to figure out what price you need to be at to make sure that you're profitable because if you're not profitable right at the purchase, you've already put yourself in jeopardy of losing money on the deal. A huge, huge part of being profitable on a property is making sure that you make a good purchase right at the beginning. And that's actually the end of the process. So the beginning of the process is step one, you need to figure out what the property will be worth. And I'll explain that more, why that's important. But you're getting to that end point, and your end point depends on what your strategy is. So your end point could be what is this property going to be worth when it's rehabbed? So I finished the rehab on this property. We're putting it on the market. What is it going to sell for? Or you may just want to know, you may either and want to know what is it worth as is. So sometimes when you buy these properties at auction, judicial sales, whatever, you don't know what the condition of the property is. So you're going to want to know what the property is worth at the end after you do the rehab. And then what is it just going to be worth, worst case scenario, just as is? Because sometimes you can make a lot of money just buying properties and throw them up on the market as is and still make a really nice profit off of those when you're picking off these auctions. Um, when you're buying properties off of the MLS and stuff like that, obviously you're going to have the better opportunity to view the property. You'll have a pretty good idea of what it'll be worth that end price after you've done your rehab. Um, the other aspect is, and I've been getting a couple of phone calls for this lately. You may not have any of those factors in play. So we do sometimes get people that are buying those auctions or buying properties like that that are looking owner occupied. So you want to live in the property yourself. You're not even looking at this necessarily as an investment property. Maybe long term because you want to make money on it when you go to sell, when you go to move in a few years. But you're going to move in it yourself. This is going to be your house. So in that case, you're using your end price as being um, not necessarily comps or anything like that, but you're saying a property similar to this. What is it worth to me? You know, if I go out and there's none of these properties around the market, I want it for myself. Obviously, it's worth a lot more to you personally because you like a particular type of property or particular area or something like that. So your own property you're buying for yourself is going to have your own independent value on it that might be different than what the CMA value is on the property, the comparative market analysis of the property is. Um, you'll also get different viewpoints and I get people sometimes that get frustrated when they go to the auctions or something like that because their valuation they put on a property is so drastically different than the valuation that someone else has put on a property and they don't really understand why. They're going, well, I thought this property was worth 200,000 and this person over here paid 250 and I don't understand how they're paying 250 and they're making money on these properties. because they may not be reselling them. A big part of it when you're looking at the market value of the property is you might be looking at it as, okay, I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to fix it up, I'm going to flip it, I'm going to put it back on the market, and that's your evaluation standard. Other people might be evaluating those properties, whether it's on the market, auctions or whatever, and looking at it based on the rental value. And those are two completely different appraisal standards that they're using on a property. They're not looking at it based on what is it going to be worth in order to sell it to another buyer in 6 months. They're looking at it thinking, okay, if I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to do however much work I need to do to put a tenant in it. I put that tenant in there. What is the income and expenses now for the property? You multiply that over a 12-month period to get your cap rate to find out how much profit the building's making, and then look at that, and you come up with your own price using that income appraisal method. And sometimes the income appraisal method can be drastically different than the market analysis, your ability to flip the property. So sometimes when you're going against people and they drastically outbid you and you just can't figure out how come, they might not care that the property isn't going to be worth that much more in 6 months. What they care about is they can rent that property out. It's income flowing at their standard that they want to be at, as far as bringing in monthly, annual profits on that property. And maybe they hope that they can make a profit when they sell the property in 10 years, but they're not worried about that. What they're worried is, am I going to be making a steady flow of income off of the property? They don't really care what, it's a factor, but they don't care as much what the property would be worth to an owner occupier per se. So those are all the different methods you can use for coming to your price. There's not a right or a wrong. It's just what your strategy dictates, is going to dictate to you what method you're going to use to come up to your price. So you're going to figure out which of those methods you're using. You're going to come up with your end price. Now we start the backing out process. So backing out means, now that we know what it's going to sell for, um, we can back out all of the factors that are involved, all of the expenses that are in there, so we can get down to what you can safely pay for this property so that you're making a profit on it. So that's what we're doing. We're not, and I see this mistake often, and it's why I'm making this video. I've been getting a bunch of calls lately, and it always kills me. Um, I get people, and you might be one of them, and we can still make it work, but the mistake is to buy a property with the assumption that you can make it work. And it just doesn't work that way. Sometimes you can get lucky, but you're getting lucky. You're gambling with your money. You can't buy the property with the assumption that after I do the work, maybe it will be worth that much. You can't operate off of, if I buy a house for 250,000 and I put $50,000 worth of work in it, it'll be worth 450,000. You don't know that. And there's closing costs involved that I'm going to go over in a second, but you don't, you can't factor that in of guessing what your end price is going to be. You could be in a particular area where and I've had this happen, where you could go in, put the $50,000 worth of work into that property, and it's still only worth, the 300,000. So you're not making any profit off of it. Or, there's even some extreme examples where you can go into a property and do $50,000 worth of work, and maybe you only generated $30,000 worth of value, because if you get stuck with a bad property and you put new electrical and you put new plumbing and you put a new roof on it, those are expensive things that didn't necessarily increase the aesthetic value of the property. So to someone walking along the street, they're going to think it looks pretty much like the same house. If you ran out of money in your budget and you didn't do the bathrooms, you didn't do the kitchens, now you're in a tough spot, because a buyer isn't going to see that much value in that, unfortunately, because they can't feel it when they're in the house. So you got to be careful with all that. So um the first thing, now you have your end price, whether you're doing appraisal, you're doing a CMA, you're keeping it for yourself, whatever. Now you have your price. The first thing is, and we even get this where people go straight for, okay, we're going to figure out what our rehab costs are. No, that's so step one is the price. You just get to step three. You forgot step two. Step two is, we need to make sure that we calculate out your closing costs. And the first biggest mistake I get is people not backing out properly. The second biggest mistake I get are people who don't have enough of an appreciation for closing costs. If you are going to get involved with um, real estate, and it's the biggest complaint that people on my side of the industry have when you look at these TV shows, when you're watching HGTV, when you're watching these flipper TV shows, they do not give an accurate representation of what's involved with closing costs. They just kind of throw it in at the end or they don't throw it in at all. If you're going to get involved, you need to have a deep appreciation for closing costs because they're significant. I'm in Chicago in the state of Illinois, and well, I'm actually in Northbrook, which is a suburb just outside of Chicago, but we say Chicago. Um, Closing costs are significant. And it will take a lot out of the profit. What a deal you thought was going to be profitable can get blown up in 5 minutes when I start evaluating all of your closing costs and you realize that you didn't incorporate any of that into your spreadsheet. And you should have a spreadsheet that incorporates all of your expenses, all your closing costs, everything whenever you're doing any of your deals. And sometimes I see people's spreadsheets and there's just not even remotely the number of closing costs they need on there. So what are we looking at? So if you're looking at a property that's on the MLS, it's more of a conventional purchase. Um, Generally, it's going to be laid out for you. They're gonna have you're gonna get a title policy, you're gonna get a title commitment, title policy, you're gonna get the real estate tax prorations. You should be provided a survey. If you're buying a bank-owned foreclosure, they may not provide the survey for you. If you do that, part of my initial consultation, I heavily recommend you go out and you buy a survey before you purchase the property. When you're doing these bank-owned foreclosures, they say that they're not going to provide one for you, and a lot of buyers just go, "Oh, okay, whatever, it is what it is." And I heavily recommend my clients to buy that survey before you close. Um, because they're not making that representation on the title policy they're giving to you. You're sort of you're taking the assumption of whatever risks that are there. So you don't know before you bought this income, property you're going to keep for income property that you're planning on flipping, whatever, that there could be a serious issue with the boundary lines of that property that you could have backed out of that deal last second and go, oh my God, that would have been a huge problem. Now that you've closed, you haven't ordered that survey, you own the property, you're spending all this money on doing the rehab, you get all the way to the end, you're trying to sell it to someone else, and now you found out that there was a serious boundary line issue. And now you have to pay money to fix that because you didn't want to spend the 500 $600 on a survey when you were buying it because you wanted to save that $600. Now you potentially have a $5,000 $10,000 issue when you're trying to sell the property because you assume that risk. So please order those, pay the $600 and get that survey. You need to know. So, and if, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, a survey is sort of like a picture, like a drawing of the property, and they're going to show you where the house. It'll give you an approximation, a measurement of where exactly the house sits on the lot. It'll tell you if there's any easements. It'll tell you if there's anything where most areas you have to leave a certain amount of frontage, green space. You can't build the house right on the sidewalk, so it'll give you an idea of how much space you have to leave there. Anything on the side you have to leave open in the back. Most properties there's going to be something like the rear 5-10 feet of your lot, you have to leave open for utility easement. So if there's an emergency with electricity or something like that, they can get in there, Commonwealth Edison can get in there and do work on the power lines. You can't have your structure on that property and prevent them from being able to get access to that. So that's normal. What we want to find out is if there's any issues with the property. I've It's rare, but you get extreme examples where the neighbor's property is 5 feet over onto your property, or your house, your garage is 5 feet over on the neighbor's property. Now, that's not supposed to ever happen, but it does happen because people make mistakes. And then you have a huge problem because now you have someone who's encroaching on another property or someone's encroaching on your property, and now you have to deal with that. Um, So we want to know that kind of stuff as soon as possible. Most of the time, we get minor stuff like maybe a fence is just a little bit over. So, a fence will be like an inch or two on one side or inch or two on the other side, and nobody really cares about that kind of stuff. But we want to know any big things. If a driveway sometimes will go over, that gets to be a bigger issue. So we want to know that. You want to know that kind of stuff ahead of time. I mean, leaving that until when you're going to sell your property is taking on a huge amount of risk. I think it's $500 when you're buying it. We'll get in. I'm trying to do the regular ones first here. So when you're buying it from someone on, that's it's on the market, most of the big things are going to be taken care of. Like if you're in the city of Chicago, you'll get a zoning cert, so you know if it's a two flat or a three zoned a 2 unit, zoned a 3 unit, anything like that. I just had a deal where we actually the bank was selling it. The buyers thought it was a single family home. It was supposed to be a single family home for them to rehab, and it turned out it was a legal 2 unit. It was a two flat, but it appeared to be a single family, which sets up a huge red flag because that means a lot of unpermitted work was probably done on the property, and the buyer decided to back out. They said, I don't know what was done to make this two flat look like a single family. There could have been a lot of structural changes made to it, so we need to back out of the deal, and we did, unfortunately. And that kind of stuff's going to happen. So you'll get that. So with a regular deal, you're going to get all that kind of stuff. Um, the higher risk. And if with a bank owned um, or doing any of the auctions or judicial sales or anything like that, we do get issues with the HOA, the homeowners association. So if it's been foreclosed on, any kind of foreclosure property, where you have the bank involved or anything like that, the buyer is going to be liable to pay up to 6 months of the unpaid association dues on the property. And generally, whenever you have a foreclosure, the association generally has been paid in a long time. So you as the buyer need to know that whatever, if you're looking at a condo or townhouse, anything like that, and it's subject to a foreclosure, they're going to come at you, not going to come at you, but they're going to present to you before you go to closing. Oh, by the way, and your attorney and the people you're working with should be telling you this kind of stuff. Um, when you're getting ready to go into your closing, you're going to get a paid assessment letter that's going to say you as the buyer need to pay up to, and usually is 6 months of the association dues. You're paying that as part of your closing costs, which isn't so big of a deal when you're dealing with maybe like a townhouse where you have like $100 association, but gets to be a very big deal when maybe you're dealing with a high rise condo that has a $700 a month assessment, and now multiply that by six, and you need to pay that as part of your closing costs. That could be a large item on your settlement statement, so you need to know that. Um, I'm going to separate out. We're going to do all the auction kind of closing cost issues separately in a second. So I'm just doing, if you're doing like something on the MLS, it's a bank owned foreclosure. So that should be pretty much everything. You're gonna if you're doing a regular closing, they'll make sure the taxes are paid up to date off of the closing date and stuff like that. And hopefully you get your right tax preparations going forward. But those are the closing costs you need to factor in. If you're bidding at a sheriff auction, meaning you're live at a judicial sales location, or at the courthouse or whatever, and you're buying those, you're literally buying the deed. In that case, you have the most amount of risk as far as the closing costs because you're getting nothing. All you're getting is the deed. So, and you're assuming all liability with the property. I just went over this with someone yesterday. So you have no title. You're sending them the money. You're giving whatever bid you have that day, and then you're sending them the money within 24 hours. Um, when you go through an auction website like auction.com and it's a live auction, you will have a 30-day period to set up your closing. So when you're going through auction.com, you will have the opportunity to buy title or obtain title insurance, make sure the taxes are paid up and that. So you do have the opportunity to hit a lot of these steps similar to if you were buying a bank owned foreclosure that's on the market. Um, but when you're doing those sheriff's auctions, when you're going and you're bidding and you're getting the deed, so you're getting no title, so you don't know if there's any other liens that are on the property that you could become liable for. you become 100% liable for any of the outstanding real estate taxes that are due. So if the taxes haven't been paid for this year and you go tomorrow and you go to a sheriff's auction, you buy that property, those are now your taxes. You're going to have to pay those real estate taxes on the property. Um, you, we have to be careful with the HOA. You still have to pay the 6 months of the HOA, but there is a law on the books in Illinois now that if you fail to perfect the lien, meaning you don't go in right away and start paying the HOA payments as of, after you become the owner of the property, and then pay that 6 month if a certain amount of time, and there's a gray area there because it's a reasonable amount of time. So what's reasonable amount of time, we're not really sure. um but outside that reasonable amount of time, if you become the owner of the property and you don't go and start paying the monthly HOA and pay that 6 months that you're supposed to be paying, they actually have the ability to go after you for the full amount. So there are some cases where people knew they had to pay the 6 months and knew they should have been paying, the HOA going forward, and just ignored the HOA for several months. And the HOA went after him and said, okay, well, since you didn't pay us and you didn't perfect that lien, now we can go after you for the full 18 months that the previous owner didn't pay and try to collect the full amount from you. It's a little funky, but you need to be aware of that if you're dealing with HOAs and you're buying your auction properties. You need to get in there right away and say, hey, I just got this property. This is my property now. Here's the first month's HOA payment. So you don't run into that issue. Um, Same thing with the survey. You need to be, you're not going to have the opportunity to get a survey before you buy the property. But as soon as you get it, you should try to get that survey right away just to head off any issues before you start your rehab. So, you can incorporate that in. And then obviously the zoning, you're not going to know either. The zoning certs stay good for 6 months. So you can go and just order a zoning cert and find out what the zoning is and just have the cert, and, whatever you decide to do with it later, flip it or sell it, or even just hold it. The zoning cert costs about $120. And then might have to pay like $50 for the person to go get the cert for you. And then you'll know whether it's illegal, two flat, three flat, whatever the case may be, and then make plans going forward that way. But you need to know, it doesn't matter what um, anything else says as far as what the zoning is, or what it was on the MLS for, or what the architect says it is. The only authority that matters is going into the city hall. And this is city Chicago. We're specifically talking about city Chicago has a zoning certificate, not the suburbs. So if you're dealing with any of the suburbs, this doesn't apply. I apologize. City Chicago, but this is a hot issue, so that's why I'm hitting it. There's a lot of people who think that they have three flats that really only have two flats because they dezoned a lot of areas of the city of Chicago. So people who previously have had, people may have had a legal three flat, 3 unit building 10 years ago and have, operated that way for, it was a legal 3 unit building for 50 years, but um, went to sell their building, this year, and found out no, the alderman went through and lowered the zoning for the area, so now it's only a 2 unit building. And that basement unit, what they did is they eliminated a lot of the basement units. All those basement units are now non-conforming uses, or they're illegal units. And it's causing us lots of issues. So if you're bidding on those units at judicial sales, just know that you, as soon as you get the property, you need to figure out right away, do we have a legal 3 unit building, 4 unit building, 2 unit building? What is it? Or single family? Um, and then when you're doing these deals, whether you're buying it with cash at judicial, or you're going, and then you decide that you're going to pull some of your money out and go to a hard money lender, which a lot of my clients do. So you go in with cash, buy the property, and then immediately switch over to a hard money lender, and get a loan on the property for the purchase price plus your rehab, and get that money and start doing the rehab to the property. A lot of people do that. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have $100,000 cash, you go to the auction, You buy a property for, $100,000. I'm just using, just throwing the numbers out there. Buy a property for $100,000. You know it's going to need about maybe a 60 grand rehab. But when you get done, it's going to be a $200,000 property. Um, you go to what's called a hard money lender. A hard money lender is someone who lends to people who want to purchase and rehab properties. It's riskier, so the money's a lot more expensive, meaning they charge a lot more, but they're willing to make riskier loans, meaning they'll see that the property will appraise for 200,000 once you've done the $60,000 rehab, so they'll lend to you the depending on the lender you go to, maybe we'll lend to you 80% of the purchase price and then 100% of the rehab costs or some variation thereof. Some will even go 100%, 100%. Um, if you build up a really good relationship with them. But generally, if you're starting out with someone, it'll be like 80% of the purchase price, 100% of the rehab. So potentially they would give you a loan for $80,000 plus the $60,000 rehab. So you're out of pocket that 20 grand. You got your money back. Now you can go do that rehab and then sell the property and make the profit. Um, the difference if you've never done that before, and generally those loans are really fast. You could get those loans done in like 2 weeks. The people who do that are very quick, and they're happy to give you that money. The difference is when you're going to a conventional bank for a conventional mortgage, that interest rate right now might be 4.5, 5%. When you go to those hard money lenders, they may charge you a point or two at closing, and the interest rate on that's going to be like 9 to 10%. The money's a lot more expensive, which is why when you're doing those rehabs, you have to move very quickly. You can't sit on them. So the mistake that I see, not a lot of people, usually at that stage, you kind of are more informed, but a mistake that can be made is not incorporating how expensive the lender costs are. So you need to have all of your holding costs incorporated, and a lot of times people incorporate the holding costs of, okay, my here's what my insurance is going to be, and for God's sakes, get insurance on all these properties. As soon as you buy them, you need to have them insured. You get insurance on the property and with the property taxes and the water and the light bill, and that's it, right? And it's like, well, no, you need to factor in the cost of your money. If you're doing these hard money loans, the monthly cost for the hard money loan can be it can be significant. Where if you let the property go on for too long, you've really lost a lot of your profits in paying out those monthly payments to this hard money lender because it's expensive. So you need to factor that into that spreadsheet that I'm talking about, where I see people that have a rehab that goes on for a year, and it's like if the difference between 6 months and a year isn't just you had to pay another real estate tax bill, it's that 6 months of interest at maybe 10, 11% to a hard money lender. That could be the deal killer. That's the difference between you making a profit on a deal and breaking even on a deal is that right there. Having a rehab delay that causes you to pay a ton more interest on that hard money loan. Um, so you have to properly incorporate that into your spreadsheet as far as your closing costs, and it becomes part of the closing costs, both because you might have to pay a couple points at closing, and those points come out of the money that you're going to get, and then the holding costs, and part of setting up those hard money loans is you're setting up escrow. You could be doing a lot of different things. Maybe they don't give you all the money for the rehab right away. They put the rehab funds in escrow, so you have to come out of pocket to start the rehab so that you can take the draw. We'll call it a draw. So that 60 grand of rehab, they're not just going to give you that money, they're going to hold it. So it'll be part of your closing costs, but they're going to hold it, and now you need to have the money on hand. You need to have the 10, 20 grand on hand to start that rehab. Then when you get the 20 grand worth of work done, you can go to them and go, oh, okay, you got that work done. Now they give you the 20 grand out of that draw. So you can't be cash poor at closing because you have to be able to start to get the work going at the property or have a good relationship with your contractor where you explain to them that they're going to pay when they complete tasks. You're not going to give them money up front. They get paid when they complete tasks. And sometimes that can be difficult because the contractors want to get paid up front. That's a whole different issue. We'll talk about contractor issues a different day. So you got to have all those closing costs in there. You got to have all the closing costs in there. And then even factoring in the closing costs on your so whatever you decide to do with the property, that's your exit strategy. So you might hear investors talk about what's your exit strategy. What they're trying to say is, what is your strategy for the end result for the property? So that's, do you want to resell it? Do you want to keep it for a rental? Do you want to keep it for a rental for 5 years or 10 years and then sell it? Are you going to buy it, take out a loan against the property, rehab it, and then sell it, or rehab it and then keep it? They're saying, exit strategy is a very simple way of saying, so what's your plan from when you take title to the property until you're no longer own the property? What's that plan? They just want to know. And you could say, I plan on owning it for, it's not enough to say that you're going to have it as a rental. They want to know, are you going to have a rental and keep it for 5 years, keep it for 10 years? What's the exit plan for this property? So you got to know all that. So if you have a short exit plan, you're trying to flip properties. Um, you've done closing costs on the purchase side. You also need to do closing costs on the sell side. And that's the closing cost that I find the most flippers get tripped up on. They have a pretty good idea of what's going to cost them to buy the property, but they don't have a really good sense of how much it's going to cost them to sell the property. In some villages and some towns, the transfer taxes are significantly more on the sell side than they are on the buy side. So you factor that in. You have to factor in the realtor commission. I know you can want to try to sell it yourself, but a lot of times you're not going to get it done unless you put it on the market. You have it on the MLS. So you have to factor in your realtor commissions in there. When you bought your property, you got, depending on how you bought it, you may or may not have gotten tax prorations, which was nice because it was a credit towards you. Um, but you're going to have to give those tax prorations when you sell the property. So if you have, a $10,000 tax bill, you close in July, which it is right now, you're giving about a half of year's worth of tax prorations to that buyer. So you got to give them, roughly about a $5,000 credit at closing. So you have to factor that in there. That's even more important when you're dealing with those auction properties because you didn't receive a tax proration. So you didn't get the benefit of the credit when you acquired the property, but you're going to have the liability of giving the credit when you sell the property. So you need to keep that in mind as well. So the big ones obviously are the commission, the realtor commission, and those tax prorations. I find people significantly undervalue the tax prorations, and when we're doing the settlement statement, they don't realize that, and it really cuts into your profit when you're dealing with a $5,000 line item on there. Um, Sometimes people just forget about unpaid tax bills too. I get it often where rehabbers often don't pay the tax bills that are open during the course of the rehab. So when we go to closing, we're paying all the previous tax bills too that they didn't pay, and they're just like, "Oh my God, I have to pay $15,000 of taxes." I'm like, "Well, you got to pay them." So you got to factor all that in your spreadsheet, and then there's the title cost. So I could go more in depth with title costs. I'll make that a separate thing on another day because you got to go kind of item by item what the title insurance costs. The title insurance costs, the recording fees, all the kind of stuff that's on there. That all adds up to, and then that's just cutting into your profit because it's just cutting into your profit. So you need to know all of those. So now you have all of your closing costs on the purchase, you have all closing costs on the sale of the property. So now you've whittled down all those numbers to get to, so we have the amount that you want to resell it for, the closing costs on your purchase, you have your holding costs, you have the closing costs on the sale. So as you can tell by now, um, it's not as simple as just what I buy it for, what I rehab it for, and sell it for. There's a lot of stuff in there that's going to whittle down your potential profit on that property. So you need to have all this in mind. Um, Now we get to the fun part. The fun part or the stressful part is trying to estimate your rehab costs. If you're buying a property on the MLS, or it's on, it's just on the market, you'll have the opportunity to do a full inspection, take your contractor in the property, give you a full bid. Even when you're doing that, make sure you have a good relationship with your contractor, or maybe get a secondary bid from your contractor, even if they're a friend of yours, or just kind of double check and just make sure you get a line by line estimate from the contractor instead of just saying, yeah, sometimes they want to work on and go, I can do this for 50. Well, what does that mean? What does 50 mean? Because 50 for me might mean a lot of different amount of work in the property than 50 for you. So we need to break down the floors. We need to break down molding, painting, um, I've seen some flippers really get. I've seen some investors because this goes for apartment buildings too, and buying holding apartment buildings. I've seen many investors get hung up on losing money on a property because the contractor says I can have all this taken care of for say $50,000, and then they get all done, and you as the investor, the client, walk into the property and go, there's a lot of stuff here that isn't done. They go, well, yeah, I never said I was going to do that, and you're kind of left in the lurch a little bit like, well, you gave me the impression that you were going to do everything. They're like, well, I don't do painting. That's a separate thing altogether. Or I don't do landscaping, or I don't do XYZ. um that you'd be surprised how often that happens, unfortunately. So you really need to go line item by line item and say, are you doing this? How much is this? Are you doing this? How much is this? Or the other dangerous thing is that the contractor says they're going to do it, and then they just don't do it. And you need to double check all that. So you really, by going line item by line item, it gives you the ability to go back and say, okay, you said here was how much this was. This is how much work you said you're going to do, and kind of check things off. And then if there's a problem, you can go back and go, okay, well, I paid you for this, so you didn't do that, so I'm not paying you for that work. Um, so really get things itemized out. More often than not, the issue that I see is, not that they don't want to do extra work. I shouldn't say it that way. Not that they don't want to, um, say that, have you come in and them say, oh, I didn't do that. There was a misunderstanding. More often than not, the issue that we run into is, the contractor goes in there and gives you a bid and tells you, how much it's going to be, but maybe the bid didn't encompass everything. So they go in there, they give you the bid, they tell you how much it is for the flooring, but maybe when they told you the price for the flooring, that was just for like the materials, or it was just for the labor, but it didn't have both. And then you get false expectations of, oh, this is going to be really cheap. This is way cheaper than I thought it was going to be, but you were only getting half the bid. So they might go through and give you a bid for the property, but the bid is only for their labor. It's not for the materials. So you need to be careful. Now, you get there and they're ready to start work, and they're saying, okay, well, did you buy the floor? Did you buy the tile? Did you buy the paint? And you'll find out really quick that, tile, one box of tile is cheap, but if you're going to tile a bathroom, you need a lot of tile, and that gets expensive fast. Or if you're going to paint a house, um, you might, your point of reference might have been one time you painted a room, you needed a couple of gallons, but if you're going to paint a whole house, you need a lot of paint. And paint gets expensive fast when you're talking about the amount of paint that you need to paint a whole house. So prices can get away from you. So you need to make sure you have all that incorporated. Trust your contractor, trust the biz that they're giving you, and ask a lot of questions, so you don't get caught short on your rehab budget, because that's frustrating when you just flat out run out of money on a project and have to figure out what you want to do with it. I've had several of those situations, and it's very frustrating when you can't get it to the finish line. Um, the hardest part is when you're looking at these sheriff's auctions, and auction.com doesn't let you go into the property. So that's the difference between when they put on the MLS versus when they have it on auction.com, one of these bidding websites. If they put on the MLS, the expectation is they're going to give you access to the property. If they put it on one of these auction bidding websites, the expectation is they're not going to give you access to the property. Even if it's vacant, they're still not going to give you access to the property. So you're doing blind bidding. Blind bidding means you have to, drive by the property, maybe peek in the windows, look on, maybe there's some previous MLS data on it, and make your best guesstimate as to what work needs to be done in there. Um, it's a blind bid. You're guesstimating how much work you have to do in there. Um, the hardest ones are condos, because you have no idea what the condo. You can't, unless somehow you talk the association into letting you like walk around the common areas. Even then, first of all, they're not going to let you do that. I've never seen them let you do that. Second of all, you're still not going to be able to see into the unit. So you have no idea. You don't know what the condition of a condo is. So those are always, a huge gamble. Now, the flip side is with the house, there's a lot more risk that you have foundation issues, you have roof issues, you could have, huge, big ticket items that are wrong with the house. If you're doing a condo, generally you can evaluate the condition of the building and have a pretty good idea of, okay, I think we might have to do a new kitchen or a new bathroom, but for the most part, it'll probably be fine. We just might have to spruce it up a little bit, gut the unit, but we're not going to have any like huge big ticket items versus a house that can carry a huge amount of risk if you don't get in there. I mean, the first thing whenever I have a client buy a house blind, obviously you gotta get the drills locked and get in there. And usually the first thing they do is run down in the basement if there's a basement and just pray that there's no water down there, there's no leaks or anything like that, because you don't know. So what do? You have to guesstimate. You have to guesstimate the worst case scenario. You say, okay, we're gonna bid on this house. What do we do if the roof's leaking? Everything is outdated. All the tubs are pink. The basement's flooding. How much is that going to be to do that house? And you have to use that as your number. You have to use a worst case scenario number. Now, hopefully, when you're doing your research on the building, you can start to whittle that down. You can say, okay, we can see that the roof looks like it's in okay condition. We don't know 100% it's not leaking, but we can kind of figure that out. Look in the windows, kind of get a sense for, oh, hey, and sometimes this happens. The kitchen actually looks pretty good. It looks like it was newer, or it's in pretty good condition, or it's got hardwood floors in there that look like they're old, but we can go in and sand and stain them, which is significantly cheaper than having to put in all new floors. So that's always fun when you see just sort of some old wood floors in there. You go, great. That makes it so much cheaper now. All we have to do is sand and stain those floors, and it'll look really good when we're done with it. Certain things like that, so you can start to whittle down what those expenses are. So you're trying to come up with a good number, a safe-ish number, for what your rehab is going to be. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be a blind number. So whatever your rehab number is, you need to add more back into it for the risk factor, because there could be things that you don't know. And sometimes you get stuck with situations with design choices too. I had a house where we were trying to evaluate what to do with it, and the decision was made to change the kind of like the color scheme and go with more of the gray and the whites that are popular right now. But in order to go with the white molding, it required changing all of the doors out in the house. And when you're changing, it's again, if you're changing one door, it's not expensive. If you get yourself caught in a situation where you have to change 20 doors, that gets expensive because of the materials and the labor. So we're like, well, maybe we shouldn't do everything, white trim. Then maybe we should keep a natural wood trim, which is more expensive. The white trim's cheaper. It goes down a whole rabbit hole when you're trying to decide these things. So try to figure all that out the best that you can. But know that there's going to be little things, little tiny things, the fixtures or whatever when you get in there. So you need to have a cushion. Figure out what your rehab is going to be, and you need to put some cushion back in there, put a 10-20% back in there, because things are going to pop up in the house. You haven't walked the house. There's going to be little things that you're going to end up having to do that you didn't think you were going to have to do. So put some cushion back in that rehab budget. Um, so you can get that rough idea. So now that you have all that, so now we have the purchase price, or I'm sorry, we have the sale price. You have your sale price. You've incorporated all the closing costs of the purchase. You've incorporated your holding costs. You've incorporated um, your sale closing costs. You've incorporated your blind bid. Now you're left with a number that is your potential bid number. You have that price that you've reached of, here's what I can make selling the property. Here's everything I'm going to have to spend in order to purchase and sell this property. Here's what I'm going to have to spend to get the property to that condition. Or that could be, that number could be very minimal. I mean, if you get a property that um, you can sell it as is, you realize you can make 20 grand doing a quick as is flip of this property, and you can just say and I've had a couple of these where your rehab costs are just, we're going to clean the carpet and paint a couple rooms. We're going to spend 5 grand and put it back on the market and make a quick 15 after incorporating all the closing costs and everything. So you can do that. It doesn't always have to be a 50, 60, $100,000 rehab. You can do minimal rehabs. It is possible to do those, but they're kind of few and far between to find them. So don't get your hopes up on those. So after you've incorporated all that in, you get down to the price you can now pay for the property. Um, but you're still not done. Um, and this is where I really coach people a lot. You think you're done. After telling you all that, you're thinking, all right, Bob got me all the way to the end. Now I know what I can pay for the property. That's the minimum amount that you can pay for it and still be profitable. Because after you've incorporated all those things we just talked about, if you pay more than that number, you're now negative. You don't think that you're negative, but you're negative because after you hold in, incorporate in all of your closing costs and all the rehab costs and everything, and you paid above that number, you're not going to make the purchase price go up. I mean, some people think they can by doing fancy cute stuff to the house, but when you're looking at the hard numbers, you've now gone over that, so now you've already started losing money on the house at the beginning. You don't even know it yet. You're just not going to find out until the end, when you don't get the price you want for the house and you're walking out of closing and you're unhappy. How do we kind of double down on that and make sure that you're profitable? Um, Keep in mind, we never talked about what your profit was going to be. So you have the sale price, you have all the closing costs, the holding costs, the closing costs when you sell the property, your rehab costs. Now you're at that price that you can pay for it. You got to remember, you're here to make money. This is profitable. So you have to take that purchase price, and now you have to come up with, what's your profit number? Do you want to make 20 grand? Do you want to make 10 grand? Do you want to make 20 grand? Do you want to make 30 grand? How much money do you want to make on this property? And you say, I want to make $20,000 on this flip. Well, now you have to take 20 grand off that number. You have to incorporate in your profit on there. Because if you forget to incorporate your profit on your spreadsheet, you are going to have a hard time making money. You have to incorporate a line item of, what is my profit going to be on this property. So you're going to take your profit. Part of the putting in that profit at the end, is something I like to call your risk factor. So like when you're looking at the financials you run on an apartment building or something like that, you'll see the vacancy rate. A vacancy rate is, you calculate a number in there to incorporate, there's not going to be 100% tenants paying 100% rent all the time. There's going to be some tenants that are going to miss rent, some tenants are going to move out, some, no one's going to move in, so there's going to be some missed rent there. So you incorporate that into your numbers every year, because you're not going to hit 100% rental income. I do the same thing with this type of situation, with evaluating a property to buy for, either whether it's a flip, a hold, whatever the situation may be. Because again, all your numbers can change on the different scenarios. You need to factor in I call it your risk factor. A risk factor means you need to incorporate a percentage of your rehab, of your profits, whatever, towards the total budget, towards things that can go wrong. And that could be a lot of different categories. It's a broad spectrum to categorize a lot of different things that can go wrong with the property. Depending on the neighborhood you are in, you might need to calculate a risk factor, because you may not be able to find quality contractors. And this is talking very real about experiences I've had, experiences that you'll have in different parts of Chicago, different parts of the suburbs, whatever. Um, you have to assess your risk of, are you dealing with an area of the city where it's going to be very difficult to manage the work and expectations of your contractors, and that can vary depending on the neighborhood that you're in. Do you have a risk of, you could do work on the property and people might break in and take some of the tools or the supplies that you have in the property? Depending on the neighborhood you're in, you need to incorporate some of that. If you're trying to fix and flip a property where it's going to be an income property, so you're going to put tenants in there, what is your risk of picking a bad tenant, or picking a tenant that maybe doesn't, says they're going to move in and they don't move in, or things don't work out, or you fail an inspection, or you put a tenant in the property and think everything's going to be okay, and then by month two they're already missing rent. Now you're trying to sell a property with a bad tenant in there. Now you just messed up your whole thing that you're trying to do, because you're trying to sell a property with a bad tenant and you're trying to sell it a top dollar with a good tenant in there. Things like that happen when you're dealing with like a residential flip. You can have little hiccups. There could be little now you've already incorporated into your rehab budget things that could go wrong with the property, but you still want to have a little more cushion in that risk assessment, because you don't know little things that can happen. Maybe the village is going to come in and start, saying that you didn't cut the grass, and now you have, weed cutting, grass cutting fines or whatever on the property. Or one of the neighbors decides that they don't like you, so every time you try to go show the property, the neighbor takes it upon themselves to come out of the house and tell all the prospective buyers what, a mean person you are and they shouldn't buy the house. And it really doesn't matter what the neighbor says. All that matters is if, the neighbor's crazy, it's going to deter your property. People don't want to buy a house next to a crazy person, so you're going to have a hard time selling, which I've had to deal with that. um well, there's little tweaks and little weird things that can happen when you're dealing with selling a property, and you need to put in a risk factor. Um, and I made a list of all the things I've had go wrong here. So yeah, tenant issues. Um, you can get a list. If you don't have it, I can send it to you. Just contact me, email me, or send me a note on the comments. There are villages that require very specific steps in order to buy and sell a property. If you don't follow those steps, they will not give you what they're called transfer stamps. It's a stamp that gets put on a deed. We can't record the deed without those stamps. If we can't record the deed, we can't close. So they can hold up your closing. And you have to do everything that the village wants you to do in order to sell the property. So they may come in and say you have to do a certain repair. So you may do all the repairs that the buyer wants, but the village could come in and say, we want you to do these additional repairs. I just had that with a property. The buyer did the home inspection and did did the repairs that the buyer wanted, but the village came in and said that we needed to put in an escape ladder in um, one of the what do you call them? I'm going blank right now. The things from the basement, so you can get out the window wells. We had to put an escape ladder in the window well because it was just a little bit too high for someone to get out. Um, so we had to like special order. We couldn't. They wouldn't use any of the ones that carried any of the major hardware store brands. So we had to go get one, special order one, have it installed. So we have this escape ladder in there. That's a minor example. It just happened to me a little while ago, so it's in the back of my head. Sometimes you can get significant repairs that the village will require, or they just have certain steps they want you to go through, and you need to make sure you go through all those steps to do what they want you to do, so you can sell this property. So you need to know all that. Some villages don't have anything and they don't care and they're great to work with. Some villages have so many requirements that I just don't even want me or any of my clients to do any projects or any properties in particular villages, because they're so difficult to deal with. I honestly don't know what they expect people to do. They scare investors away or deter them from wanting to do business within their village. I really don't know what their expectations are, but they're very difficult to deal with. So you need to make sure if everyone's passed on a deal, maybe they're passing on a deal because it's in a neighborhood where you're going to have a really hard time pulling permits and getting the village inspector to approve things. And it's going to be really tough getting that project done. Um, if you're dealing with the city of Chicago, and you buy like auction properties, you need to be aware of the issue with water bills with the city of Chicago. So the city of Chicago, you can't transfer a property, you can't record your deed you get from the sheriff until you pay the water bill in full. You have to call it a full paid water certificate. Until you get that full paid water certificate, you can't record your deed. Depending on the type of property and where it's located in Chicago, I've seen some past due water bills upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 easily. It gets crazy how high some of these water bills get, and you have to pay the whole thing off. You're expected to pay it off, or you can't record your deed. So be wary of that. The bigger the income property, the scarier. I've seen some apartment buildings, like 6, 8 unit apartment buildings with $25,000 water bills that had to get paid. 2 and 3 flats with like $10 to $15,000 water bills. You need to be careful. So if you're dealing with these auctions in the city of Chicago, be and that's part of this whole risk assessment. These water bills, you could get blindsided by a crazy water bill. I've seen some people, just a deal has gone from being profitable to being um underwater in an instant. If you're dealing with city Chicago properties, um the big thing right now is that, for me at least, for a lot of these properties, is water bills. So be careful with that. um you're, especially doing like the blind bids, you're not going to know of any latent defects. So latent defect is anything that you as the buyer can't readily see, that the seller was probably aware of it, but the seller's been foreclosed on, and they don't really care about disclosing it to anyone else because they're like, well, screw it, I'm losing the house. So no one really knows about it. The only person who knew about it is gone now. So a latent defect means if a property looks great, but you don't know that there's a beam that's cracked in the attic that no one can see, or um, maybe there's something wrong with the foundation, but it's covered up, or there's some, the electrical is faulty or is not up to code behind the walls. That, there was a something bad that got put in, and they just covered up the walls and left it and hope no one would find it. That's a latent defect. So and that's happened on properties too, where you have to be careful. You see on these HGTV shows, um they go through the sledge. First of all, no one does a rehab, goes in with the sledgehammers, just starts knocking things out. You don't do that. It drives me crazy when you see that. I don't know anyone that goes running into a house with a sledgehammer and just starts knocking out drywall. You don't do that. And also, if you're going to think you're going to start knocking out walls, you need to have a long conversation with the contractor, because when you knock out walls, you need to make sure, number one, that there's nothing that's load bearing. And if there is something load bearing, you might have to change beams. And changing out beams is way more expensive than what they make it sound like on those TV shows. So be really careful before you start thinking you're going to open up the kitchen into the dining room. You may have to replace the header beam. And I was watching one where they're like, "Oh yeah, it's an extra $500." You know, good luck finding a contract that's going to do that. So, oh, I'm sorry. So when you're doing that kind of stuff, you start opening up the walls. Um, the dangerous part of when you start opening up walls is you can find faulty electrical, you can find faulty plumbing, you can find serious things, you can find scary things in the walls of, you realize how bad the house has been put together. And now that you know about that, now you're responsible for fixing it. So you can have the best house in the world and open up the walls and find complete electrical and plumbing disasters that now you have to do something with it. Again, all part of the risk factor that's involved. And then what was my last one? Oh, just losing profit. So part of doing that risk is, it doesn't happen extremely often, but I've had a couple scenarios where um you can lose profits on the end, not by anything that you did wrong, but by external factors. So maybe a property really similar to yours goes on the market, but for whatever reason, they sell it for way less than what you thought you were going to sell yours for. So now you have a really bad comp. Um, that's a huge factor in condos. So I've had many a condo project where you do a significant amount of rehab, you go and throw it up. And then like the week before you go to throw your unit up, someone else, even on the same floor, will put their unit on the market. Or, condos go by tiers, the units above or below you are exactly the same as yours. Maybe the person directly above you puts their unit on the market, the couple days before you, just by happenstance, and theirs is way lower than what you thought yours is going to be. Or maybe you're the same price and their unit's way nicer than yours, and you're like, oh crap. That unfortunately happens, and there's nothing you can do about it other than you just lost profits because of circumstances, that person put their unit on the market. Now you're not going to get the price that you wanted had they not done that, had they not put their house on the market or condo on the market. Houses, the same thing. Usually the houses aren't exactly the same, but What I have happened with houses is sometimes people will put theirs on the market, and then because there isn't enough, or maybe you pick a house in an area, you do a rehab, and none of the other ones on the market are rehabbed, and because you're maybe the first one in a block or a neighborhood to do it, you don't appraise out because you were maybe a little bit too aggressive. um, I had a client a few years ago. He was doing it in an area of the city that hadn't been heavily, rehabbed yet, and he did a beautiful rehab to a house. I mean, the house is amazing. The buyer was happy to give him the price that he was asking for it, but because he was the first one to rehab a house in this pocket, the appraiser didn't have a comp. He just said, I don't have anything to comp this to. So he ended up having to lower the price, I think like 12 grand. I mean, it was a healthy, it was a hit. And he had to lower the price. And my client was mad because he was the guinea pig. After he did his house, after he sold his house, a bunch of rehabbers came in after that had been working on their properties at the same time. And because he was the first one, then they were able to use his house as the comp, and they got the prices that they wanted for their property. So he went around to some of them. He called a couple of them and was like, you should really be giving me some money because I helped the rest of you guys out. I was the guinea pig guy. So that can happen too. You might just be the first guy on the block or girl on the block that did a rehab. And because you're the first one out, you don't have the benefit of the comp. You have to be the person to set the comp for everyone else to make the profit. That's an unfortunate situation, but it happens. So when you're doing that, what you think you're going to sell it for, economic factor, the stock market can crash. I know a lot of guys that are doing rehabs right now. They're awake at night going, I hope, you know, someone doesn't say something and the stock market, crashes tomorrow, and then I'm stuck and I can't sell my house. That's a stressful thing too. So all the different factors, the time of the year too. I've had a lot of projects where you projected being ready to go on the market in the spring, and or you buy a property thinking you're going to have it on the market in the spring, and you don't have it done till Halloween. I mean, unfortunately that kind of stuff can happen where you just completely miss up on the project flow, how long it's going to take, the contractors, everything. And the time of year you put it on the market obviously is going to make a huge difference too. I mean, if you put a property on the market on New Year's Eve, you're going to have a hard time selling it. Versus if you put it on the market, on May 1st or something like that. The difference between putting on the market in April, May versus putting on the market in December could be, $10,000, $20,000. So it makes a big difference. So you have to factor in some risk there because everything's not going to go perfect. I'm going to tell you that guy right now. I'm sorry if that's depressing to hear, but everything's not going to go perfect. Things are going to go wrong, so you have to factor in those things are going to go wrong. All right. So that's the whole strategy. So whenever you're evaluating those properties, and I realize what I just described to you is a lot, and it is a lot, and it's hard, and it's why um, going back to some of my previous videos, it's why establishing your strategy is so important because doing this does take a lot of time. So if you're trying to do this with 100 properties a day, you're going to be exhausted. You can't do it. But if you're going to make money in real estate, if you're going to invest your money intelligently and securely, you have to hit these steps before you're going through and you start buying properties. So that's why it's important to establish your strategy and narrow down what properties you're evaluating so that you don't exhaust yourself trying to do everything I just described to you for too many different properties. You need to narrow it down because if you don't do this, and unfortunately, I get it a lot. You're going to put yourself in a situation where you made a bad buy. Um, if the property can sell for 300,000 and your closing costs are going to be, with the purchase, holding costs, and the sale closing costs, let's say it ends up being, $40,000, and then your rehab is 50, and so you're in it for, to get it to the end point is going to cost you, $90,000, and because you see this gonna sell for 300,000, and I get this time. I get this sometimes where people get so excited that they buy the house for 225,000. You've already gone over. You've already lost money. You haven't even started yet, but you've already lost money. You just don't know that you've lost money until you go to sell it, and I go to cut you your check at the closing, and you realize that you lost money on this property over the long run. Um, so it's important to do all of these steps so that when you're evaluating the property, you can say, and it helps you with negotiating. Negotiating tactics are so important. I've had many a property where um, the seller maybe will say, we can't go a dollar under 220. There's no way we're going to let it go. And I've had many investors successfully go in and say, look, I think your house is great. I'd love to give you 220, but I think it'll sell for three once I do a $50,000 rehab. All of my closing costs are going to be about $40,000, so I'm in for 90. I need to make some profit on this. So, now we're at 110, and maybe this, and then, you can incorporate different factors involved. I say, look, the best offer I can give you is, 185, 180, 185, and just lay it out very directly like that. So, this is what everyone else is going to give you. This is the best offer I can give you based on the numbers. That's a very successful negotiating strategy that I've seen some people use. You have to be very aggressive with it. You have to know your numbers well, because they may come back and go, oh no, you overestimated the rehab, or about, you have to say, no, I've been doing this. I know exactly how much it's going to cost. It's the 50, the holding cost, the nine, the 40, the holding cost, 50, the rehab. I have to make a profit, blah, 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 blah. The most I can go to, 190 is my best offer. I can't go any higher than that. And sometimes the sellers come back and go, okay, no one explained that no one ever explained it to me that way before. Okay, sure. Well, now I understand. That sometimes that can work a lot with investment properties too. If you see an overpriced apartment building or two flights, something like that, you can go in and say, look, you and I both know your building needs work. It needs an $80,000 rehab. I need to make money on it. Here's how much the hard money lender is going to be. Here's how much my holding costs are. So I can offer you X amount of money. And the seller, who hopefully is also an investor that understands numbers, can look at that and go, yeah, I'm not happy with it, but what you said makes sense, so I'll take your offer. I've seen that happen quite a bit too. So um, this is a good strategy for you to figure out how to use on your purchases, whether it's MLS, whether it's auction.com, whatever, to make sure that you're making smart purchases. And then by making that smart purchase, you're setting yourself up for success to make a lot of profit on the other end when you're selling it. So it's a happy experience for you at closing, when you get that check and you get the profits that you're expecting. So that's it. That's deal evaluation, kind of 101. I hope this is beneficial to everyone. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Comment below. Let me know what your thoughts. If you disagree with anything, if you like what I said, if you have follow up questions, please say it. And I we'll try to keep this going. I keep saying I'm going to do these more often. I keep getting really busy, but I'll make my best effort to keep these going. Hopefully the YouTube live thing will make it easier, so I don't have to keep going back and editing the videos. And I'll see you soon. Thanks.